Dear colleagues, thank you very much for being with us today, and a special thanks goes to our colleagues from Corvinus Collegium, one of the most distinguished and most prestigious institution of academic kind, not only in Hungary, but in Central and Eastern Europe, definitely, which has been investing quite a lot in academic excellence in the last years, and many very well-known international scholars are either nowadays present there or have been as visiting scholars during the last 5-6 years and so on. I know quite a lot of them. And recently, I just have to remind some of you know that Mr. Todd Laszlo made very nice podcast, which they usually have about the elections, especially in Eastern Europe. I had the privilege and to be an honor to be the guest at that podcast, and it really came out pretty well, I may say, modestly, and thanks to Mr. Todd. And I hope that we will continue our cooperation in the future. It was supposed that our today's Zoom guest come in vivo with the colleagues and with some group of students for a visit, kind of academic political visit to Novi Sad and Belgrade recently, but they postponed, and I'm sure that we will have within a short time possibility to meet them alive. In the meantime, actually, due to the very big importance of the elections and of what was really going on recently in Hungary, I asked Mr. Hajdú to give us a separate presentation just to see what was going on, why results were so different from what was expected, and what does it mean generally for the future of the Central East European space, but also for the future relationship of the Hungary with Brussels, which is, as we know, a very specific question. Just a couple of words on him. He's a young scholar, but somebody who already has quite a big prominence in Hungary. He finished his PhD in 2020 with the supervision of the famous Professor András Hajdú, who was rector at that time of University of the Budapest University, and he is political scientist, interesting in the theory and political party politics as well. And exactly I will have to be precise about the name of the dissertation. It is called "The Radical Right as a Reaction to the Challenges of the National Sovereignty in Various Western European Countries." In the meantime, he was also working in the cabinet of Vice Prime Minister for Hungary. And this is very important place because political system is mainly, let me say, directed through this coordination. And recently he returned back to the Corvinus to continue with his academic career, which definitely will be very interesting to follow in the future time. I think this is enough from what I could give for the beginning. András, thank you very much for being with us, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much the invitation and the possibility, and also thank you for the kind introduction about my person. I prepared with a short presentation. Yes, here it is, about political campaigns and political culture in Hungary. Which is, I think, important to analyze the current campaign and the election results of the parliamentary election, which was held on the same day as the Serbian parliamentary and presidential election was on the 3rd of April. So I will start with a short summary about the main characteristics of the Hungarian electoral behavior After that, I will speak about the previous political campaigns and the development of the Hungarian party system after the system change. And after that, I will speak about the parliamentary election from this year. So here you can see the main characteristics of the Hungarian electoral behavior, which are mostly based on the post-communist heritage of the Hungarian society and the consequences of the 4 decades which was dominated by the communist ideology and communist politics during the second half of the 20th century. The first very important point is that the Hungarian voters have negative attitudes or some kind also negative and positive attitudes toward the government and the state. They wait from the state strong and impressive policies, but the Hungarian voters are very pessimistic about the but the Hungarian voters at the same time are very pessimistic about the influence of the government in the normal days. So we can summarize this situation as a dual scale of values, because the expectations about, for example, social policies, education or healthcare are very high from the state, but at the same time in the economic field, in economic policies, the attitudes and expectations of the Hungarian voters are quite limited. And another important factor is the rejection of party discord, which was important also before the communist era in the Hungarian society. And another important factor is the individualization, which was strengthened during the so-called Kádár era, which was the quasi-second half of the Hungarian communist era, which started after the revolution in '56 and finished by the system change in 1989-1990. And the main political issue during the Kádár regime was that those people who were not openly against the communist system could have some kind of positive, especially financially or in their career, positive subsidies from the state. And those who were openly against the communist regime, they find strong gates, strong frames in their life. And another strategy of the Kádár regime was that those people who were not openly against the communist regime could go forward in their own life, in their private life, in their family life. And this process pushed the Hungarian society to an apolitic and pessimistic political and electoral behavior for the 1980s and 1990s. And this is a cause why Hungarian voters are quite cynic about political issues and political debates, and the trust in different institutions are quite low. For example, when during the 1990s, there were social and financial restrictions by the social liberal government led by Gyula Horn. The trust in every political institutions declined, not only by the government, not only by the parliament, but also, for example, by the trust in the constitutional court also declined. And the participation in politics were quite limited after the system change. The numbers of the people who were, for example, members of parties were quite limited. Only the Hungarian Socialist Party, the post-communist party, had a larger number of party members till 2010. But after that, their organization, their network collapsed. So this is the main. These are the main characteristics of the Hungarian electoral community, which were important to introduce, I think, for you at the beginning of this topic. And the second one, are the political campaigns after the system change, which was a learning process step by step. Foreign political consultants appeared very early, already in 1990. The Hungarian opposition, so-called world, political world, before 1990 were dominated by two blocks. One bloc was a later right-wing catch-all party, the Hungarian Democratic Forum, which won the first parliamentary election in 1990 and created a coalition with the Christian Democratic Party, which is nowadays also a partner of the Fidesz, and an agrarian party. Another bloc was led by a liberal party, a former liberal intellectuals from university world, and some of them were party members of the Communist Party, but they were the part of the intra-party opposition blocks. This liberal bloc was led by the Alliance for Free Democrats, which was the second party in the first parliamentary election in 1919, and the leader of the opposition for the first after the first election. And also, and this liberal bloc had another smaller parties. One of them was the Fidesz, which was first created as an alternative youth organization against the official youth partner of the Communist Party. They reached the parliamentary threshold during the first parliamentary election, and they became very quickly an important actor for after the first parliamentary election, but they were the part of the opposition that time. And the third bloc was that time in the Hungarian party system, the Hungarian Socialist Party, which got only a little bit more than 10% during the first parliamentary election, but they had a very good political leader, a very talented and very experienced political leader, Gyula Horn, who was foreign minister before the system change. And they had another politicians who were already ministers and members of the parliament before the system change. And already for the first parliamentary election, the right-wing catch-all party, which I mentioned, the Hungarian Democratic Forum, already invited foreign political consultants, especially from Western Germany and France, where the leader of this party, the first prime minister after the system change, József Antal, had several personal good contacts. But József Antal died before the second parliamentary election which was held in 1994, and József Antal died in December of 1993. And after his death, the Hungarian Democratic Forum collapsed for the election in 1994, which was won by the Socialist Party, the Post-Communist Party, who got the majority of the parliament. But they formed a coalition government with the Liberal Party, Alliance for Free Democrats, which was the biggest opposition party between 1990 and 1994, to get the two-third majority in the parliament. And after that situation, the Fidesz started to become the leading force of the opposition by intellectual and political aspect. They were the smallest party that time in the parliament, but the former other two opposition parties created the new government, the new coalition, and the Fidesz stayed in the opposition. And those right-wing parties which formed the previous government lost most of their supporters, most of their voters in the election in 1994. And therefore, the Fidesz could create a new political community, a new political alternative against the left liberal government. And they won the parliamentary election in 1998. Yes, here you can see leaflets from the first political campaign in 1990, and here is the Fidesz leaflet, which has the message that the new generation started its own political career, which wanted to break with the previous debates, with the previous political ideological camps, and they called themselves that time as the children of divorced parents, because they tried to create a new alternative, a third way between those political camps who were the opposition of the communist regime, but created separate political parties during the system change and were the main opponents after the first parliamentary election. Yes, here you can see Gyula Horn, who was the prime minister between 1994 and 1998. After his failure, the Socialist Party started to find a new leader, started to find a new party leader, a new prime minister candidate who could beat Viktor Orban. And for the election in 2002, they find Péter Medgyessy, who was a finance minister and a deputy prime minister before the system change. And he was a great technocrat, and a totally other political option, a totally other political alternative, which was the message by Viktor Orban during his first governance period. And in 2002, the political campaign was very overheated by emotionally and by policy factors also, and it was already another electoral system, and it was won by the Socialist Party also in the first and in the second round. But during between the two rounds, Viktor Orban started a very intensive personalized campaign, and the candidates of the Fidesz won several constituencies where they were only on the second place after the first round, but they were not enough to get the parliamentary majority. So in 2002, the Socialist Party could form another, again, coalition and government with the small liberal party which I mentioned, the Alliance for Free Democrats. But Péter Medgyessy resigned in 2004, and that time the Socialist Party elected a new leader, a new prime minister, Ferenc Gyurcsány, who was quite dynamic and younger than the older generation of the Socialist Party. And here, for example, you can see a big placate about him from the parliamentary election campaign in 2006, which was again won by the Socialist Party with a short but comfortable majority by parliamentary mandates. And after that victory, the socialist government made a policy turn, a very drastic policy turn. For example, during the campaign, they promised decrease of taxes. And after the victory, they made tax increases. For example, the VAT tax and other taxes were increased, and also several new fees were introduced. For example, tuition fee and several fees at the healthcare system. And after that came the so-called Összöd speech, which maybe you heard previously. It was a speech for the parliamentary group of the Socialist Party by closed doors. And in that speech, Ferenc Gyurcsány said that they lied during the campaign and they should make quite different policies during the next governing period what were promised during the campaign. And it was published by the Hungarian radio during the local government campaign in September of 2006, which was a big scandal in Hungarian politics, and which is the label also nowadays of Ferenc Gyurcsány. And after this scandal, the support of the Socialist Party started to decline very quickly. But this period between 2006 and 2010 had so many problems, social problems, and many political scandals, corruption, and debates between the coalition parties, debates inside the Socialist Party about the role and person of Ferenc Gyurcsány, about the style of his government, and several other political debates were very strong during that period, which declined further the support of the Socialist Party. And also the security had several problems that time, and which was followed by the financial and economic crisis in 2008. And these problems, these processes limited the support of the Socialist Party for the parliamentary election in 2010, which was won first time by the Fidesz with a two-third majority. And the Fidesz started quite different style and different policies after 2010, which may be most known by you mostly than the political history and the period before 2010. So I will focus after this for the election campaign in 2022. Or do you have any questions for the previous slides?
I think it's okay to continue and to finish with this, and after that we will have a lot of questions probably, but go on and finish introduction.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's see this table. I summarized the strengths, the weakness, the positioning, the rivals, and the main message of the most important political actors and relevant parties from this election campaign. Let's see first the Fidesz. The most important factors by strength were for the Fidesz the governance, the governing position, and the performance in governance, and the strong electoral basis, which is quite the same for several years, and the very orderly, organized communication, which is true also for the party and also for the government. Despite these positive elements, the party should confront with negative stereotypes, which I could speak about these factors later if it's interesting for you. And the main message based on these factors was in the campaign the stability and peace. It was also the main message before the war in Ukraine started. But this situation made more important this message, and the prime minister candidate of the opposition bloc, Péter Márki-Zay, and several other politicians from the opposition parties made the mistakes that they spoke before the war started at the end of February about that Hungary should send troops and other weapons to support Ukraine against Russia. After the war started, they organized for the first day a demonstration before the embassy of the Russian Federation in Budapest, where their leaders started again openly that Hungary should send troops to Ukraine. And after that, they realized that it's not the message which is supported by the majority of the Hungarian voters. And another problem was that this message had not majority also by their core voters. The majority of the opposition voters were also against to send troops and weapons to Ukraine. So they made a big mistake in that point, but it was the top of their mistakes. Because the left-wing opposition in Hungary could base their political activity especially on online media platforms and the capital Budapest, which was won by their candidate in 2019. This opposition bloc, which was the main opponent for this election, was created by officially 6, but in practice 8 or 9 parties. So it is a very interesting, or we can say a very strange political phenomenon, and they organized a primary to select their candidates for the individual constituencies. Hungary has 106 individual constituencies, and they organized a primary during the last October. And it was also a primary for the prime minister candidate. And this election was won by a quasi outsider politician who is a mayor of a town in the Hungarian countryside, and who is a very impressive person, but who has several conflicts also inside the opposition bloc with other opposition politicians. So the internal debates were constant during the electoral campaign, the election campaign, since he won the primary. And another problem was of the campaign of the opposition bloc, that these parties have too many strong personalities, too many strong politicians who do not want to step to the second line, not only during the campaign, but at all in politics. And therefore, they tried to create a common message, which was only about anti-Orban and anti-Fidesz, but they could not form a coherent political alternative against Fidesz and against the governance of the Fidesz, which was quite successful, for example, by economic policies during the last 12 years. And just quickly, I should speak about two other political actors. One is called Our Home or Our Country, which is a nationalist radical right party, which was split from another previously radical right party called Jobbik, which decided to be the part of this opposition bloc after the parliamentary election in 2018, and a part of this party wanted not to cooperate with left-wing and liberal parties, and they created this party, which at least could reach the 5% parliamentary threshold, because they have own identity, own subculture, and they try to formulate a quasi third way against the Orbán-Gyurcsány rivalry during the campaign, and they were against the two bloc and the quasi-COVID dictatorship. This was the only party during the campaign which was openly against any vaccination program, any jobs, and under another COVID, another restrictions because of the COVID pandemic. But this message was not so harsh, not so important after the war in Ukraine started. And the fourth relevant parties was a joke party called Two-Tailed Dog Party, which which was impressive for those left-wing voters, especially in Budapest and some towns and cities and the countryside. Those intellectuals who were not satisfied with the campaign of the opposition bloc, or who could not support the opposition bloc because of the presence of the Jobbik and some politicians who were openly against the EU or NATO and Western orientation political issues before they started to cooperate with left-wing politicians. So this joke party had a special style, but they were not so strong by organization, and the political agenda after the war started was also not so good for them. So they could not reach the parliamentary threshold at the end, and they got only they had the support between 3 and 4% on the day of the election. Yes, and this is a summary table about the results of the opposition primary, which I mentioned during the previous slide. Here you can find the result of the election about the prime minister candidate, and here you can see the numbers of the candidates of the parties who won the primary in the constituencies. And the most important act was during this primary that in the first round the leader of the previously radical right-wing party Jobbik could not reach the second round. He got only 14%, which was quasi the failure of his party at all and his personal political career, but they got at least 10 mandates inside the opposition bloc. And nowadays he is also the leader of this party, also in the parliament. He's the leader of the group of this party, but with this result, his personal political career may be finished. And between the two rounds, the mayor of Budapest, Gergely Karácsony, withdrew his candidacy and supported Péter Márki-Zay for the second round, who could beat Klára Dobrev, who is the wife of Ferenc Gyurcsány, the former prime minister and the leader of the Democratic Coalition, which is a party of Ferenc Gyurcsány and split from the Socialist Party after the defeat in 2010. And nowadays it is the strongest party, which has the strongest network in the country from the opposition parties, and they have the most MPs inside the opposition. And our prediction that they will try to capture the whole opposition side of the Hungarian politics and try to integrate every other political actors at the opposition side for the European parliamentary and local government election in 2024. Yes, and here are some messages from the campaign. As I mentioned, Ferenc Gyurcsány is a strong politician by the opposition, but his personal popularity is quite limited because of the negative effects of his governance between 2004 and 2009. And therefore it was a central message during the campaign that Péter Márki-Zay is not an independent political actor. He depends on the political activity of Ferenc Gyurcsány. It was the campaign so-called Gyurcsány show, which showed only a new puppet, a new clown to the Hungarian voters. And here you can see another messages from Fidesz by the last phases, the last chapter of the campaign. Here you can see again a common picture with Ferenc Gyurcsány and Péter Márki-Zay, and the message was that they are dangerous and the voters could and should stop them if they vote for Fidesz. And the other message was that Viktor Orbán and the Fidesz could give the peace and stability and perspective for Hungary as they made it during the last 12 years. Yes, and here are two pictures about the result of the election, and I can naturally speak about this issue also if you have questions about the results or any other previous topics which were mentioned during my presentation. Thank you, and I wait your questions.
Thank you very much, András, for first introduction to the general political system. And I just have to use the opportunity to show the colleagues the book I have here. If someone is interested, I'm using that quite a lot. It's from 2009. You know people, of course, András Koroshenyi, Csaba Totti, and Gabor Terek, who is also from Corvinus. It's called the Hungarian political system, and it's really fantastic introduction. Of course, it was written like 10 years ago, even more, published in 2009, I mean 2010, but still fantastic introduction of the political culture of the party system, institution, local government, and so on and so on. And I would be really happy to see from you and to get some especially English. We are not so good with Hungarian, as George Balašević has this famous song in Serbia. I'm not speaking too well Hungarian. Actually, something which could be good overview of last 10 years of Orban's ruling and so on. But in a way, definitely we heard quite a lot and more or less more than enough material to start debate. So I'm inviting the colleagues to join us either through chat or to directly ask you questions here. And I think we have something, okay. Yeah. So please, do we have someone interested?
Населенных пунктов: Веселая, Борщево, Балаклея Харьковской области, Киселевка Херсонской области, Маяк Запорожской области, Докучаев.
Stevan is listening to something. Okay, colleagues, do you have questions, comments? Okay, I will start as people relax and get some ideas. I have a bunch of them as somebody who is really interested very much in trying to follow elections, and let me start with several. First, something which is very actual nowadays, because I think that you gave us very good explanation how it ended up that something that was supposed to be very, neat elections and very tight ended up with again Fidesz having 2/3 majority. I think that the whole this with Ukraine in a way helped him, and that's very interesting. Mr. Todd saw this parallel, because in Serbia, Vučić also had immediately changed his slogan after the Ukraine conflict started, and his main slogan was peace, stability, Vučić. So actually, in a way, Orban also followed this trajectory definitely very efficiently. But first, let me start with the current relationship with the Polish. That's one of the most interesting questions, because as we all know, both of us were together in conference in December in Warsaw, in which we saw that this strategic partnership between Orban and Kaczynski, let me say in a way, is something that is very strongly built on, not only for the common preservation in power. Polish were very much interested in the results of the Fidesz in this election, because the next year, as we know, there will be a general parliamentary elections, very decisive also for them in Warsaw and in Poland generally. And of course, the next issue they are working on is creation of some broader right-wing bloc for the election in 2024 for the European election. So, as we all know, of course, the paths started to go apart with Ukrainian crisis, and I follow what's going on in this very harsh rhetorics from the Warsaw. But how is it perceived from Budapest nowadays? Is it something that is, like current situation, but strategic alliance is supposed to stay, or it is perceived as a possible future problem for even common approach to the European elections? And the second one, of course, it is still early. Orban got his fourth consecutive mandate. And we should not forget, as you mentioned, that he already had like 4 years in power. So it will be, 20 years in power when this ends up. Are there any speculation within the Fidesz Hungary about possibility of him, going to retirement within next 4 years, and what is, if it's possible to speculate about the future of Fidesz after him, or he is planning to stay still in power in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The questions. First, I would like to speak about the relationship with Poland and the issue of the war in Ukraine. It's a very difficult situation, and the geopolitical situation, heritage, and experience is much different in Poland than in Hungary. And the Prime Minister always says that in these situations, the cool head is the most important thing in politics. And the Hungarian geopolitical strategy, not only during his governments, not only in this situation, but during the last centuries here in Central Europe, that there are three very strong and important political actors in this area. Berlin, previously Vienna, Ankara, previously Istanbul, and Moscow, previously St. Petersburg. And therefore, the goal of the Hungarian state and Hungarian government is to make the balance between these big actors, these big political forces, and try to keep them outside of their own household. We have to cooperate with them. We have to have good economic relations, good economic cooperation with them. And with this strategy, we could prevent a war with them, and strong political conflicts we can prevent by this strategy with them and also with other neighbors. And this is the main political strategy, main geopolitical goal of the Hungarian government since 2020. But this is also relevant and has a central point during the previous decades and previous centuries in Hungary. And this is a quite a little bit different political strategy and the way, which is the way and the political goal of the contemporary Polish government. But I think that the leaders, the political leaders, could manage this situation because several other issues, several other political questions could get them to the same political position, to the same political camp, and they can manage this conflict in the future. And the other question was the future of the Prime Minister and his political community. After the victory in the parliamentary election in 2018, the Prime Minister said that in his mind, the period between his first victory with two-thirds majority in 2010 and the date, the year of 2030 is a constant political period. And he speaks about several times, he spoke about several times that he predicts a new political situation in Europe for the end of this decade. And it will be a new world in economic aspect, by the education aspect, and several other policy and political issues. So we are living in a quickly changing political situation, a quickly changing political world, a quickly changing economic world. The main actors will change also in this region till the end of the this decade, and he think that he could lead his party and with his party and government the country till the end of this decade, and could reorganize, innovate, and lead the country to this new political situation as to a better position with better conditions yes. This is my short answer.
Okay, thank you. Do we have more, please?
I have one.
Yeah, please.
Petr Ćurčić from Institute of European Studies. First of all, Jonapot and Köszönöm szépen for such kind of presentation, and thank you very much for this brief introduction into history of present-day Hungary and most important persons in Hungarian political life. I would like to ask you two types of questions. Some researchers, although we don't have official census, shown that there has been such a significant decline of religious people in Hungary. I think under the 50% of Hungarians identify themselves as Christians. And I would like to ask you, what is the future of Hungarian electorate? Will religion play a significant role in politics? And my second question is about electoral system. I know that Hungary has a very long tradition of implementing the Westminster political system, but I would like to ask you, is that or will that system will change? Because I think that this results show that there is a more tie result, but Fidesz won with significant majority. So will it be reformed, or what you see as a alternative for political life in Hungary? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the questions. First, about the religious issue. Yes, in Hungary, the communist regime broke the so-called historical churches, the Roman Catholic, the Greek Catholic, and the two most important Protestant churches, the Calvinist and Lutheranist churches. They started to reorganize themselves after the system change, and they are very important. They are very important partners of the Hungarian government during that period when the right-wing parties formed coalition and government. And so this is the situation also nowadays. After 2010, these churches, and it's a new phenomenon that some kind of neo-Protestant churches became also important partner of the state and the government, especially by education and social issues. They have several institutions, schools, own universities, but the religious data about the Hungarian society or their religious practice are not so strong, but that the group which is deeply religious, has deep religious feelings, reorganize always itself. So, for example, around 17–18% said during the 1990s that they attend weekly, minimum weekly in churches for religious events. Nowadays, the rate of the people who answered the same for these questions, that how regularly do you attend religious events in churches, is the same. So we are nearly 20–25 years later when these data appeared in Hungarian social sciences, and the data showed the same picture nowadays. And it's quasi constant after the system change between 15–16 and maximum 20% said that they attend regularly, minimum once a week, in religious events in churches. But if you ask that, do you believe in God, or is the Christian heritage an important element of your cultural background, more than 60% said yes. And it's also a consequence of the individualistic and atomization process, which I mentioned during my presentation, that the majority of the Hungarian people have religious feelings, but it's a very individualistic religious behavior, not so the community aspect is not so strong as by the Orthodox churches in the neighborhood countries, as the situation in Serbia, as I know, or in Romania. And another important process that a lot of schools are managed by churches nowadays, and the number of these schools are increased after 2010. And therefore, we can recognize that the number of those youngs who are religious is also increasing, but not so. But this process is not so strong as the number of the schools which ran by churches increased after 2010. But if we see that the proportion of the deeply religious people and those who said they believe in God, that the Christian heritage is important in their life, in their cultural identity, did not change, I think it's maybe the consequence of these changes in the education system. And it's also a third important factor, that after 2010, religion is a mandatory lesson in grammar and primary schools. But it can be changed by philosophy or ethics, but it's a mandatory part of the education program in those schools which are not run by the state, which are not managed by which are not managed by the churches and remain by the state or private foundations, which the number of this category is very limited, but in every schools which are in Hungary, it is mandatory. And the second question was the electoral system. Yes, Hungary created a mixed electoral system after the system change. That time the political elite tried to copy the electoral system of Western Germany, the previous Western Germany, which means that we have individual constituencies. That time the number of the individual constituencies were 176, which was reduced by an electoral reform after 2010 to 106, which is the number of the individual constituencies nowadays. And the voters also could vote for party lists, not only for individual candidates. And previously, between 1990 and 2010, the number of the MPs was 386, and 176 from them were elected in individual constituencies with 2 rounds. As the system by the individual constituencies in France, in those constituencies, when any candidates could not reach 50% of the votes, was a second round between the first 3 candidates. And this situation changed by the electoral reform for 2014, and the new electoral system remained a mixed system, but it's only in 1 round. There's no second round in the individual constituencies, where none of the candidates could reach the 50% of the votes. And this was also a cause why the opposition parties started to cooperate. For the election in 2018, they already cooperated some of the constituencies. For example, some candidates withdrew their candidacy and openly supported another candidate from the opposition parties. And with this cooperation, they could win some constituencies already in 2018. And after that, they started to cooperate openly and strongly for the local government, local council elections in 2019. And they had several successes during that election. And after that, they decided a wide alliance, a wide bloc for the parliamentary election in 2022. But it was not enough, because they could not collect all of their previous voters. They made several mistakes during their campaigns. There were several internal debates, which I mentioned previously, so they could not reach the expectations of their core bases and the left-wing media during the campaign and on the day of the election. But I don't wait any serious reform in the electoral system. Maybe some changes will be by the borders of the individual constituencies, because there's a point in our electoral law that if the population in a constituency is higher with more than 20% than the average of the constituencies, the borders should be changed. Maybe this will come by some 3, 4, or 5 constituencies in the following years, but it's not a main reform by the electoral system. And I think now the political debates not about the electoral system, but the campaign and the political strategy of the opposition parties. And the majority of their politicians and the journalists and any other intellectuals in politics is now not focusing on the electoral system, but the strategy of the opposition parties.
Okay, thank you. More questions, comments, please? Do we have some? First time, second time? I'm joking if it's...
Solely.
And so if there is no any question, I will finish with two, and at the end, thank to András. I mean, there's a lot of things which are really interesting speaking about contemporary Hungary and general position. Many of the things which are also very interesting and specific for us here as well. But let me finish with two things that might be interesting, definitely, and people follow here because they are interesting for us. The first one is ideology. Viktor Orban and his system that's been lasting for 12 years already is one of the rare political strategists, or let me say political systems in Europe that is very clearly ideologically orientated with pro-family politics, with a different system of taxation, which is also supporting families and so on and so on. So, but generally, could you comment a little bit for our younger colleagues here about the importance of ideology in the internal system of Hungary, including the education and so on? And the second one is the technical, that is also very interesting for us. As you know, Serbia introduced dual citizenship 3 years before Hungary, but far less successfully for the time being than Hungary has done. I think that more than 1 million people already took the papers and the citizenship of Hungary coming from the region. And but it was the issue and the subject of a lot of misunderstandings, especially with Slovakia, I think also with Romania at some point. So could you give us overview of that in the sense how it's perceived in Hungary, and are there still problems with these neighboring countries? And one technical issue at the end, am I sure that for the first time those people had the opportunity to vote at the elections, and how many of them use this possibility? And thank you very much, really. I will not torture you anymore for the time being.
Thank you. Yes, first about ideology. The core elements of the political strategy and political issues, political ideology of Prime Minister Viktor Orban and the Fidesz, maybe three things. The first one is work. A society and an economy which is based on work, because after the system change, during the so-called transitional crisis, nearly 1 million jobs disappeared from Hungary, especially in agriculture and in industry. And the financial crisis in 2008 gave the intellectual consequence of Prime Minister Viktor Orban that the main problem were in those countries which lost their own industry and where the agriculture went to the second line of the economy. Therefore, in 2010, a very important promise was in the program of Fidesz to reindustrialize of Hungary and give a new chance and new line to industry and also for agriculture. And a central promise was 1 million new jobs during 10 years. And the left-wing actors that time thought that it's a joke, it's not serious political promise. But nowadays we are around this situation. In Hungary, there were created in cooperation with the market and with investors and big companies, and also with small companies and small family entrepreneurs, more than 800,000 new jobs. And this changed the situation in Hungarian economy and also in Hungarian society. And I think it's very important element of the also the electoral successes of the Fidesz, not only in these elections, but the previous in 2014 and 2018. And I also said in a debate in a TV program that the left-wing parties made a serious mistake when they spoke that these new jobs are not relevant. These tendencies, these processes in Hungarian economy is not important, because they attacked with this political message, not at first the government or Fidesz, but those people who get new job with this strategy, with these new policies after 2010. And the second important element is family, as you mentioned, because Prime Minister Viktor Orbán said several times that he thinks that the core element of Western society, and not only in Western culture, but also in Asia or in Africa, is the family, which is the most important factor and most important element of a society in economic and in cultural terms. So wide subsidies for have children, get married, and these other things are very important in the during the governance after 2010. And the third element is the cultural heritage, and the issue of dual citizenship related to this latter element, because Hungarian communism was different from the other countries in the Eastern Bloc, where the national interest, the national issues were important by that communist parties and that communist regimes. In Hungary, the situation was much different. And also János Kádár had fear from national issues, and he matched the nationalist issues with fascism in very short definition or very short explanation. And he was very passive in this issue and national minority issues in the neighborhood countries. After the system change, appeared the question in the political agenda that the Hungarian state, how should manage this issue, how to manage the question that outside of the contemporary borders of Hungary, there are millions of ethnic Hungarian people. And during the first Fidesz government between 1998 and 2002, the government created a law which gave possibilities and opportunities to ethnic Hungarians in the Hungarian labor market, in Hungarian education system, and other things. It was the so-called status law, which tried to manage this issue. And it was debated by the current Romanian government, and therefore Hungary and Romania made agreement, but this agreement was attacked by the Socialist Party during the campaign in 2002, and they said that with this act, the Hungarian government opened the labor market for 23 million Romanians. And with this act, they made themselves quasi persona non grata by the Hungarians outside of the Hungarian borders. And this process was followed by the referendum in 2004, which was about the issue of dual citizenship, when the government and the Socialist Party led by Ferenc Gyurcsány campaigned openly against dual citizenship. And the issue of dual citizenship lost this election, this referendum, but the Fidesz promised already in 2006 that if they could form the next government and have the majority in parliament, they will try to manage this situation and make a new law to manage the situation of ethnic Hungarians outside of the Hungarian borders, contemporary borders. And after the election in 2010, when the Fidesz got first time the two-third majority, they created a new law. Maybe it was not the first one, but in the first 20 or 25 new laws. Which,
if I remember, it was exactly
yes.
the first one, because they promised that they will do that.
Yeah, already in June of 2010. And yes, and how many of the people who have dual citizenship voted? Just a moment, I see one of my tables. Just a moment. Yes, there were more than 267,000 valid votes from the people who have dual citizenship, but those who has not a temporary address in Hungary could vote only for party lists by letter.
Okay, thank you very much. And we got one more question.
Yes, our colleague Stevan. Stevan, would you like to participate directly or? One moment, please. Would like to.
If not, you can read it.
Yes, it's about the Central European University and Open Society Institute. Yes, they are already in Budapest. Some of them courses were switched to Vienna, but their universities still exist in Budapest. They are active in Budapest and in Hungarian politics. Some of their teachers, professors were active during the campaign, but there were any protests about this issue since 2018 in Budapest and in Hungary, or I don't remember demonstrations which were based on this issue during the last years. And the Open Society Institute and their foundation is active in Hungarian politics. There are civic organizations, institutions, which got money from them regularly every year. and it's not a secret. It's a data by these institutions or by these organizations. They in their financial papers you can find the data about this cooperation. And these are mainly the friends or the partners of the opposition parties.
So I think that we are finishing slowly. It's 1.5 hours. And as our friend from Ujvidek already said, KSNM, thank you very much. And we really hope to see you alive here. I hope that the colleagues will be much better with the health, and the general circumstances will allow to see us alive. If not, I'm probably on 12th on July there, so I hope to see the friends I haven't been for some time to Budapest, but definitely I hope that we will use this opportunity that finally after the COVID we increase the cooperation. And just let me tell you, we profited by these scholars who are or were resident there. Gladen Papen was our guest. David Densenberry was having lecture on last Friday here. So just continue with that so we can grab them and bring them to Belgrade. I'm joking a little bit. Thank you very much, András, at the end.
Thank you. Thank you the possibility, and thank you for the questions.
Thank you very much, and we are finishing now. I hope to see you in the future.
Thank you. We will follow our cooperation.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Have a nice day.
Sziasztok.